Home. At least it was before I fucked everything up.
So originally this video was going to be sort of a first impressions video of Judgment, or Judge Eyes as it's known in Japan, which is the newest game by the Ryuga Gokuto team, the developers of the Yakuza franchise. But after playing through the game and then seeing the announcement that came out not long after I completed it, I thought I should use it as an opportunity to talk about the direction this franchise has been taking and where it now might end up, for better or for worse. The Yakuza developers are one of my favourite studios, managing to balance an intricate story, detailed world, and crunchy, satisfying combat with pretty regular releases. It's one of the few developers that reuses assets to build and expand on their created universe of games in a way that only adds to the setting and nuances of a modern daily life of crime and intrigue in Tokyo. Judgment is the story of Yagami, an ex-lawyer turned detective who has to weave his way through the underworld of Kamurocho that the Yakuza series so expertly fleshed out. The introduction shows us Yagami's time as a successful defense lawyer in Japan, a country that has a 99.9% conviction rate. His career is brutally cut short when a man he managed to get acquitted of a murder charge is caught red-handed, and he's left with a shattered reputation, choosing to form his own private investigation business. From there, things spiral out of control in a way only this series of games can, with brawling in the streets, murder, betrayal, political intrigue, and a host of crazy, very Japanese side stories. Yagami is an interesting character, more inquisitive and thoughtful than the hard-headed goofball that Kiryu was in the original games, but still featuring enough of the charm and swagger that made his predecessor so likable. Now I know what you're thinking, without our boy Kiryu, how can this be a Yakuza game? But make no mistake, although this is technically under a new name and includes series new types of gameplay, this really is a Yakuza game through and through, the same way you'd expect from any of the previous spin-offs, capturing much of the same artistic direction, plot themes, and over-the-top bravado. Much of the game world is lifted straight from Yakuza 6 and Kiwami 2, and still features the same satisfying beat-em-up gameplay from those games, so if you've played those, you'll feel right at home. It's a shame though that there hasn't been more of a concentrated effort to return the game to the 60 FPS glory of Yakuza 0, but from the looks of it, it's at least been smoothed out a little from the frame rate hiccups that Yakuza 6 had in spades. Yagami has two fighting styles that he can use, varying up between attacks that target wider groups and ones that are for one-on-one fights. These styles both have their own skills and combos, just like the previous games. They'll say in the early game, transitioning between the modes isn't as smooth as the previous Yakuza titles like 0 or Kiwami 1, and trying to use the style meant for crowd control on a boss type enemy to try and mix things up a bit seems almost completely ineffective. It is possible, but I think early in the game it's sort of a one or the other kind of thing. This does change over time though. The previous games let you unlock skills that could make transitions between styles smoother, and this game is no different. The abilities vary up and all sorts of new combat options open, and I think by the end game, you sort of have a lot more variety and better ways to approach things. Heat moves also make a return. Here they're called EX skills, but it was a little disappointing for me to see that they were, again, very similar to the past games. I think I even saw a fair number of reused animations from Kiwami 2. It's to be expected in these kinds of games, but I just found it a little disappointing. I mean, going into a new game and seeing all the new heat moves and so that sort of thing, it's one of the best appeals of these games, and there were plenty of those, but I'd like to sort of have a whole new roster of these things maybe next time. Also back are the numerous side quests, shops, and businesses to explore, along with arcade games to spend your time with. Along with these new minigames are brand new gameplay modes such as tailing, drone flying, and chase scenes, complete with QuickTime events. Most of these didn't really do a lot for me, beyond a breather from the combat, but I have to admit there's something about the noir tone of the story that sort of matches with the thrill of tailing a target through the rain-soaked streets of Tokyo. You know, it has its charm. Identifying targets from their clothes and physical features out of a crowd is also a simple but fun little touch, which goes along nicely with the investigations that pop up throughout the game that have you scrounging for clues and putting together solutions to the game's story. It's this take on Yakuza formula that I think is the biggest draw when approaching Judgment. The switch from angry Yakuza dad to private investigator changes up many of this series' established power struggles, and it places you at a much more vulnerable spot, caught between the Yakuza, the criminals and the thugs of Kamurocho, and the law. Yagami isn't always a powerhouse that can just punch his way through to his solutions, but rather uses his cunning to solve things, which can provide a fresher take on what we're used to if you've played many of these games before. The story of Judgment follows a similar trend of many of the previous games in the Yakuza series, starting with a smaller event that eventually spirals out of control, develops and grows, and feeds into a greater narrative. Like the Yakuza games, there's a big conspiracy that Yagami is thrown into the middle of and has to unravel while dealing with a series of over-the-top twists and turns. I thought at first that each chapter was going to be a different sort of case and mystery to solve, so I was a little disappointed when the entire main story ended up being just the one big case that built up over and over on itself. I have to say I enjoyed the story quite a bit, particularly the ending, which is always the best part of any Yakuza game. But I have to say that during the midsection of the game, the story really started to drag for me and become way too bloated and slow with not much going on. These games naturally have quite a lot of dialogue scenes too, but I think here it's really at its peak, with tens of minutes of characters just reiterating the same information that was already covered over and over again. I mean, I guess this was an effort to keep players, help them keep up to date with every new plot development, but for me it only served to harm the pacing and really bring my enjoyment down until the ending ramped the stakes back up again. It's definitely not a deal breaker. As I said, this is an issue in pretty much every game made by this studio, but in a game that already takes its time, it wouldn't have hurt to speed things up a little bit or maybe trim some of the fatter scenes down. The slow pace can't be said of the sub-stories though, which here are called investigations. Yagami can take these on from any safe house, and these to me are the best diversion the game has when you need a quick burst of combat and lighthearted story away from the self-serious main plot. I really adored all of these, particularly those involving the group of ridiculously cartoonish perverted thieves terrorizing young women around Kamurocho. The Yakuza team seems to endlessly come up with these ideas for these totally bizarre mini-stories that really lend a personality and culture to the city and build up this strange dichotomy against the serious main plot that I find really endearing. From chasing down a lost toupee caught in the wind, to helping a restaurant find its spark, to tracking down a mad bomber terrorizing the city, they were one of the best highlights for me and reason enough for a playthrough or two to try and find them all. Weirdly enough, I've heard a lot of people complain about how this game looks, saying things like it can't compete with current gen titles and has models and textures from PS3 era games. Now granted, this complaint crops up every time a Yakuza game releases, but it's become more and more egregious since the 8th gen put so much emphasis into how many polygons you can fit into a character model. I don't know if it's just the normies at it again, but to me this game looks beautiful, and the dense streets and really detailed and expressive characters give you a sense of their personality in a way most AAA games these days can't still even match. The Yakuza studio puts out games on a fairly regular basis. They don't have the budget of most mainstream Activision or EA anal dilation simulators. It's just so great to see that there are still studios willing to put out a lengthy game with no, nonsense DLC season passes or fluff day one content to get an extra weapon. A game that's made with passion and without compromises or fine print telling me that I should go to sign up to fucking Uplay because Ubisoft wants to sell me another checklist simulator. For anyone looking to dip their toes into games made by this studio, is Judgment a good first option? I would say yes, but I think the style and quality is more of a slow burn than the previous games than in Judgment, and the returning setting does more for nostalgia than introducing newcomers. Personally, I'd recommend Yakuza 0 or 1 if you're looking to get into this series, as they do a much better job of easing you into this world, and that's 1, not Kiwami 1, just regular PS2 classic 1.
Then step the fuck up, it's time to die.
Judgment just like Yakuza, knows it's a video game and it revels in it. It's what us boomers call fun. It's goofy, it's weird, and it tells a fun story and knows when to shut up and let me kick back and play some arcade games or throw some punks through a store window. It's just fucking fun. And in 2019, that was getting harder and harder to find. Do yourself a favor and play it. And now then we get to the second half of this video and the recent announcement of Yakuza 7. Which features a new protagonist in a new city and also a new genre. Instead of being an open district beat 'em up with RPG elements, now it's a full-blown turn-based RPG. 7 has actually been confirmed to be receiving a localization ahead of time, just like Judgment did. I'm not sure if they plan on dubbing this one too, but oddly enough, 7 has been removed from the title and is coming to West under the name Yakuza Like a Dragon. Ignoring the fact that Japan, the games themselves, were called Ryuga Gokuto, which is literally like a dragon, it's interesting to see that they've decided to remove the number from this game. Whether or not it's because of this genre change is yet to be seen, but the decision to make this shift in the next mainline title has not been taken well in either Japan or the West. It doesn't help that series director Toshihiro Nagoshi has tweeted out saying that if, after playing the game, players still aren't happy, they'll just go back to the old gameplay style. Personally, I just find this to be a baffling and bizarre move, which is going to alienate old players and split the fanbase down the middle. New players who love RPGs might try this game and then not be able to get back into the older games, or any future sequels, and fans of the series who love the action-heavy style of the previous games are just going to get bored and drop this game or skip it entirely. The Yakuza fanbase is no stranger to deviating styles and settings, as mostly all of the previous spin-off games have been well received. Yakuza Dead Souls, the third-person zombie shooter, might have been a weird sidestep with some optimization problems, but it was clear it was a fun diversion, and not the next big mainline title. The same goes for the buddy-based shooter Binary Domain, which I'm a huge fan of, as well as the Fist of the North Star game, which introduced more exploration and driving elements to the classic Yakuza beat-up style. All these experiments paid off in their own way, and not just for the variety of the player base, but experience for the devs themselves. Even more problems arise if this game flops and they go back to the old style. Are they going to keep the same protagonist? The whiplash from the same story and characters but changing up the gameplay entirely is going to hurt the possibilities of this series even more. Even Kiryu has shown up in one of the most recent trailers, and it doesn't even look like it's some sort of in a secret boss kind of a way, but seemingly as an actual relevant part to the story. Yakuza 6 was supposed to be this big farewell for this character, and this really feels like a pandering move to have some kind of draw to players for previous games who might be turned off by this new approach. I mean, are we just going to ever let Kiryu just have his rest? Let him die? What's most baffling of all, however, and why I've connected this section to Judgment, is the game's connection to Judgment itself. A new protagonist with a brand new story, with incremental connections to the past games, but with new gameplay elements. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, I know I'm not the only one who found it strange that the new gameplay style this team wanted to try out wasn't used on the spin-off title that could easily be forgotten if it turned out not that successful, not that resonant with the fanbase. Not only that, but I feel that a turn-based style would connect much better with Yagami, a clever, calm, cool, and collected guy who's a bit more thoughtful than a brash, Kiryu-esque character, which the new protagonist in Yakuza 7 seems to be. It would be fitting with the game's detective narrative, and greater emphasize the downtime of surveillance, investigations, and exploration, rather than the straight-up brawls and adrenaline-pumping action that Yakuza is known for. I'm staying cautiously optimistic for a change of pace. I'm really unsure about the direction this series is going in. It's clear the Yakuza team has talent, despite the relatively small budgets they're given. But if series exhaustion has set in this hard, I'd rather them develop an entirely new IP, another Binary Domain, something completely away from Kamurocho and this already concluded series. It's had its run, and I think it's time for it to just settle back and let the team develop something new. I can only hope this might be a first step to improving on that base they've set up, while keeping brand recognition so as not to tank their sales. Whatever comes to the future for this team though, I hope they keep that sense of fun and lightheartedness mixed in with the entertaining game systems that really drew me into this series in the first place. along with endearing characters and wild yet personable narratives. Few developers can balance these precarious elements and yet still create a product that manages to cultivate a fanbase this dedicated, and that's something that I would hate to lose. Thanks for watching.